The market began before the sun rose. Baskets were stacked on worn stone. Merchants shouted over one another, voices rough from years of bargaining. Fish glistened in wooden troughs. Herbs hung from old ropes, and silks rustled beneath greedy hands. It smelled of steam, sweat, and overripe fruit. And in the far corner, where the cracks on the wall grew moss and no one lingered long, sat a woman with a faded brown robe and a crooked stall made of 2 crates and a plank. Her name was Lian Su. She was 27, a widow and invisible, or worse, a mocked. Each morning she laid out what little she had, half a basket of radishes, a handful of turnips, some wilted greens she had picked near the temple path. The other vendors called her the grave wife, said she smelled of mourning, said her husband had brought her bad luck, a builder who died in a fall during the last palace expansion. They claimed his spirit still followed her, that anyone who bought from her stall risked catching his curse. They never said it kindly. Children threw stones at her vegetables when their parents weren't looking. Old women clucked their tongues as they passed. One silk merchant spat near her feet every time she opened her stall. Lian Su never fought back. She simply sat, hands folded in her lap, eyes down, voice soft. When someone approached with kindness, which rarely happened, she bowed deeply and thanked them with both hands. When someone shouted, she lowered her head, but she never begged. She sold what she had, or she returned home empty. And that home was a corner of a crumbling brick house by the well, where roof tiles leaked, and the neighbors banged on the wall if her lantern stayed on too long. She lived alone, save for an old clay pot where she boiled water and a faded sketch of her husband that she never took down. At night, she rubbed her hands with camellia oil to soften the calluses. She combed her hair in silence. She spoke only to herself. "I made enough for 2 buns today," she whispered once, her voice dry with cold. "One for today, one for tomorrow." That was her rhythm, painfully steady, quietly endured. But what Lian Su didn't know was that each morning, long before she arrived, a pair of eyes watched that corner of the market. He came alone, always, in scholar's robes, plain and dark blue. He wore no emblem. He carried no fan. He walked like he belonged, but did not wish to be seen. The other merchants barely noticed him. Some assumed he was a minor official's son, perhaps a poet, in search of street inspiration. He never spoke, never bought anything, but every day he passed her stall. Every day he paused, just for a moment, and looked. He watched how she straightened each radish, wiped each leaf with cloth, offered everything with care as if it were gold. He saw how she accepted mockery like wind, how she bowed to those who insulted her without bitterness. Not because she agreed, but because she chose to keep her dignity. One morning, a boy kicked over her basket. The radishes rolled into the dirt. The boy laughed. A woman nearby smirked and said, "That's what comes from ghosts." Lian Su said nothing. She bent down, picked up the radishes one by one, brushed the dirt off carefully, and laid them back in the basket. Her hands trembled only once. The man in blue did not move, but the next day he returned and left a single silver coin beside her turnips when she wasn't looking. She found it only after he'd gone. She stared at it for a long time, then looked up at the sky, confused. No one ever left silver. No one ever left anything. That evening, she bought rice for the first time in weeks, and a small bundle of herbs to boil her aching feet. She did not know his name. She did not know his rank, but somewhere deep inside, a forgotten part of her whispered that someone had seen her, not as a shadow, not as a widow, but as a person. Still, she told herself it was a mistake, a lucky accident, nothing more, because in a world where widows were shameful and poor women were dismissed, hope was the most dangerous thing of all. So she folded her robe tighter, lowered her head, and returned to the market the next day, not knowing that the man behind the curtain would be there again, watching, always watching, and that soon the market that mocked her would fall silent, not from shame, but from the sound of his voice. His name was Zhao Shen, second son of the emperor, a prince by blood, but not by nature. While his elder brother led parades and council debates, Zhao Shen preferred gardens, while others polished their swords. He studied ink in silence. Servants whispered that he was too quiet, too strange, too observant for a man of his position. Some called him the Shadow Crane, graceful, silent, and always just out of reach. But Zhao Shen heard everything. He knew which ministers faked illness to avoid court. He knew which concubines resented the empress. He knew which guards lied about bribes. And yet, none of those things held his attention. Not like her. He didn't know her name, only her posture, her quiet hands, her way of arranging vegetables like they mattered, as if they were silk, not root. The first time he noticed her was during a winter rain. He had passed through the market under a wide hat, his robe damp from the shoulders down. The wind stung his eyes. Merchants had covered their stalls with cloth. Shouts turned into coughs. She was the only one left uncovered. She sat on a low stool, soaked to the bone, holding a thin shawl over her basket as if protecting treasure. No one bought anything. People shouted at her to leave. She didn't. Zhao Shen had stopped then, not out of pity, but because she looked like someone who had lost everything and still chose to stay. That night he had not slept well, and the next morning he returned, not as a prince, not in his golden robes or with guards behind him, just as a man with questions no one else could answer. Who was she? Why was she always alone? What had the world taken from her? And what had she chosen to keep? He never spoke to her, not yet, but he watched and listened, and each day she surprised him more, not with words, but with silence. Zhao Shen had grown up surrounded by people who performed virtue, who bowed when eyes were watching, then whispered venom behind fans. But this woman, she did not pretend. She endured. She gave with tired hands and never asked for anything. It stirred something in him that he couldn't name. Respect, curiosity, something deeper, quieter, and far more dangerous. He had once believed love was for stories, for court poets and children's songs. But now, watching her lift a bruised turnip as if it still deserved a place, he began to wonder. What if tenderness did not come from palaces? What if it grew from cracked earth and quiet pain? That thought stayed with him for days, until one morning he saw a merchant push her. Not hard, just enough. She staggered. The others laughed. Zhao Shen moved before he thought. He stepped forward, not as a prince but as a man who had seen enough. "Leave her," he said. His voice was calm but heavy. The merchant turned. "Who are you two?" Then he saw Zhao Shen's eyes, sharp, steady, unafraid. The merchant's words died on his tongue. He stepped back. Zhao Shen helped her pick up the fallen vegetables. She looked at him, truly looked, for the first time. He expected fear, but saw confusion, and something else, not recognition, not awe, just quiet wonder. He bowed slightly, placed 2 coins beside her basket, and turned away. He didn't expect thanks, but as he walked off, he heard her whisper, barely more than breath, "Thank you, stranger." And Zhao Shen smiled beneath his collar, because in her voice he heard something new, not hope, but the beginning of it. The next morning, Liansu arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still pink at the edges, and mist hung low across the stone streets. The merchants hadn't yet begun their shouting. The rice cellar was still stretching. The lanterns along the wall hadn't been taken down from the night before. She knelt beside her basket and began arranging what little she had. The radishes were fewer now. 1 turnip had gone soft. She brushed each one clean anyway, but her hands trembled. She kept glancing up. He wouldn't come again. Surely not. Men like that, quiet, clean, graceful, didn't visit the same corners of the market twice, especially not for a widow with nothing. She told herself it had been a moment of chance, a passing kindness, nothing more. And yet, when she lifted her hand to fix her braid, something caught her eye, a small covered bowl, placed carefully on the edge of her stall. She froze. It was made of pale porcelain, smooth and simple, like something from a scholar's table. A strip of cloth tied it shut, still warm. She looked left, then right. No one stood nearby. The soup inside was thick, congee made with ginger and slivers of sweet potato. Rich, fragrant, too fine for a poor cellar. Certainly not something a stranger would leave for a woman like her. And yet, there it was. She didn't eat it right away. She just sat, staring, the steam curling into the air like a secret. By the time the market filled with noise, the bowl was empty, washed clean with boiled water, returned to her bag as if it had always belonged there. She did not tell anyone. She only kept working. And when the man in the blue robe passed by later that morning, eyes calm, hands folded, She didn't call out to him, didn't thank him, didn't even look up, but her hands no longer trembled. She had been seen. That evening, after the market emptied, Lian Su walked the long path home beneath the stone walls, her basket now half full of unsold greens and broken roots. The wind pressed through her robe like water, but she didn't rush. Her thoughts were heavy with warmth. She kept remembering how he had looked at her, not with pity, not with pride, but with a stillness that made her feel less small. She passed the apothecary's house, then the well, then the cracked brick wall of her home. She stepped inside, placed the bowl gently on the shelf above her stove and lit the coals, and for the first time in a long time, she boiled tea not just to keep warm, but to wait. The following morning, he came earlier, not close, not directly, just near, enough that she saw him arrive. This time he bought something, a single radish. No words, no bargaining. He placed 2 coins in her hand, far too much, and walked away before she could speak. She ran after him, not to return the coin, but to say something, anything. He had already disappeared into the crowd. Only his silhouette lingered, that quiet robe, the slow, graceful stride, the way his hands never fidgeted like other men's. That night she washed the bowl again, wrapped it in cloth, placed it near the door. She didn't know where he lived. She didn't know his name, but some part of her, the quiet part that used to dream before the world crushed such things, whispered, "He will return." 3 days passed. The radish coins became a pattern, always 1 vegetable, always 2 coins, always silence, and always when she looked up, he was already walking away. But on the 4th day, it was different. The crowd was rowdy. A fight broke. Out near the rice stall, a spilled bucket, a shouted curse, a foot slipped on mud, and suddenly Lian Su's stall tipped. Everything scattered, radishes into dust, turnips into dirty puddles. Her bowl, the white porcelain one, rolled under a cart. She didn't cry. She knelt, gathered what she could, ignoring the laughter, ignoring the voices, until another pair of hands joined hers. Not rough, not impatient, deliberate, careful. She looked up, and he was there, not in shadow, not walking away, but kneeling beside her. Their eyes met, and this time, neither looked down. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He handed her the bowl, unbroken, somehow untouched by the chaos, then stood, nodded once, and disappeared into the blur of robes and noise. But this time she didn't feel abandoned. She felt known. That evening, after the market closed and the moon rose soft and gold above the tiled roofs, Lian Su sat beside her stove with the bowl in her lap. She had placed a dried plum inside, 1 small offering, wrapped in silk cloth. The next morning, she left it at the edge of the stall, and by noon, it was gone. No one said anything. No one needed to, because some stories don't begin with thunder. Some begin with a bowl, a coin, a glance, and a silence that says more than 1,000 poems. It began with whispers. She thinks she's special now. Have you seen the way she smiles lately? Like someone left her a crown. Some noble fool must be giving her coins. The market thrived on bitterness, and when kindness bloomed in silence, it unsettled the ground beneath the merchant's feet. Lian Su had not changed her robes, had not raised her voice, had not stopped bowing to those who deserved none of her respect. But her eyes had changed. She no longer flinched when spat on, no longer shrank when bumped. She arranged her stall with a steady hand, lifted her chin just enough to see the sky, and that somehow made her dangerous, because a woman who had been broken and dared to lift her gaze again frightened people who had never known ruin. That morning the air was thick with heat. The smell of boiled meat and fermenting plum skins clung to every robe. The market's noise was louder than usual, rougher. She arrived early, as always, but something felt off. The stall beside hers, usually empty, had been claimed by 2 new vendors. Rough men with loud mouths, sacks of spoiled ginger, and eyes that didn't blink when they looked at her. She bowed politely. They laughed. "She bows like a palace maid," one of them said. "Maybe she thinks she is one," the other replied. She said nothing, but her hands moved faster than usual as she laid out her turnips. The silence around her grew tight. The other merchants didn't greet her, didn't nod, didn't glance. They were waiting. By mid-morning, the market was full. The man in the blue robe had not appeared yet. She told herself it didn't matter, but her eyes searched the crowd anyway. She had just handed a small bundle of greens to an old woman when it happened. The ginger seller stepped forward and slapped the bundle from her hands. "Selling rot again, widow," he barked. "Or are you just trying to charm more coins from ghosts?" The bundle hit the ground. The old woman backed away. Lian Su bent down silently to pick it up. He kicked the basket. Turnips rolled. Her bowl cracked against the stone. Then louder, "Or maybe you think you're better than the rest of us, sitting there with your secret smiles and your soft hands." She stood, face calm, but the heat on her cheeks burned. "I only sell what I can," she said softly. "I harm no one." "Lies," shouted a voice from behind. "A woman who sold silk. She lures men with tears and cheap vegetables. She's a widow. She's supposed to be humble." Another voice joined. Then another. Hands pushed, her robe was tugged, the cloth over her basket torn. And then someone shouted what no one had dared say aloud before. "Let her bow now, in the mud where she belongs." And someone shoved her. She fell hard, knees cracking against stone. Laughter rose like a wave. People watched. No one helped. Until the laughter stopped. Until silence fell like a blade. Because a voice had cut through the noise. Not a scream, not a command. Just 3 words. Cold, clear, final. Enough of this. He stepped from the crowd. Not in disguise, not in a robe of blue, but in royal black trimmed with silver. Hair tied high, mask gone. And as the guards behind him emerged, silent, armed deadly, the entire market seemed to shrink. The prince, a real prince. Here, the ginger seller dropped his sack. The silk woman stumbled back. The rest bowed instinctively, hands trembling. Lian Su was still on the ground. He walked to her slowly, each step echoing against the market stones. Then, without speaking, he removed his outer robe and placed it around her shoulders. She didn't move. Her hair had come loose, her lip was split, her hands shook as she tried to rise. He extended his hand. She took it. He helped her stand. And when she wobbled, he didn't let go. Then he turned to the market. His voice was not loud, but every person heard him. "She was silent when you mocked her. She was kind when you insulted her. And she remained dignified when you had none." He paused. And then slowly, "This woman is under my protection now, and I don't offer that lightly." Gasps moved like wind. Some dropped to their knees. Others simply froze. He didn't look at them again. He turned back to Lian Su, whose face was flushed with something between terror and disbelief, and said the only words she could barely process. "Come with me." And this time when she followed, she did not carry her basket. She carried nothing, because in that moment, he had already begun to carry everything for her. The crowd didn't move. Even after they disappeared past the corner gate, even after the guards vanished like smoke behind the prince, the market remained frozen. A broken stage with no actors, only shame. Her basket stayed behind. So did her cracked bowl. But Lian Su didn't look back. She didn't know where she was going. Her feet moved because his hand guided her. His robe still hung from her shoulders, heavier than it looked, warmer than she expected. The silence between them was vast, but not empty. He didn't speak until they reached the edge of the royal district. Guards bowed as he passed. None dared ask questions. Still, Lian Su's eyes darted like a hunted bird's. She had never walked these streets. The bricks were clean. The air smelled of magnolia and boiled ink. "This way," he said softly. His voice had changed, no longer shadowed, in disguise. She followed him through a side gate, not the grand palace doors, not the imperial halls of gold and banners, but a quiet courtyard. A single cherry tree stood in bloom, petals dancing in the wind. A pond reflected the fading light. There were no servants, no noise, no judgment, just calm. "This is my private residence," he said. "No officials, no rumors." She turned to him, finally speaking. "Why did you do that?" His face remained still, but his eyes, dark and bright, held a softness that stunned her. Because they touched what wasn't theirs. Her lips parted. "I am nothing," she whispered. "I'm not even—" "Don't say that," he interrupted. A pause. He stepped closer. "You don't know how long I've watched you," he said. How long I've seen your grace beneath their cruelty, your strength beneath their shame. Her throat tightened. I have no name, she said. No family, no use to a prince. He studied her, then said, You have dignity, and that is rarer in this palace than any bloodline. She stayed, not because she understood, not because she trusted yet, but because his words didn't sound like performance. And for the first time in years, no one expected her to bow. That night, a maid brought her warm tea and clean robes, simple silk the color of dusk. The sleeves were too long, the waist tied with a soft cord. She changed slowly, unsure what she had become. She looked in the polished bronze mirror and didn't recognize herself, not because she was different, but because, perhaps for the first time, she looked like someone safe. He knocked on her door before the moon was high. A quiet tap. She opened it. He stood with a wooden box in his hands, plain, old, etched with faded carvings. This belonged to my mother, he said. She never liked jewels, only silence. She said real beauty hides in quiet things. He handed her the box. Inside, resting on velvet, was a single hairpin, shaped like a falling petal, carved from bone, wrapped with gold wire. Worn, but beautiful. I don't understand, she said. You don't need to, he replied. But why me? He exhaled slowly. I've seen hundreds of women, heard hundreds of voices, but when I watched you, I didn't see someone trying to be noticed. Saw someone trying to remain invisible, and somehow shining despite it. She looked down. Tears touched her lashes but didn't fall. I don't belong here. He stepped closer, and without touching her said, Then let me make a place where you do. The next morning, the court buzzed like a disturbed hive. The second prince had brought a market widow into his household. No trial, no arrangement, no permission. The chief minister choked on his tea. The empress dowager fainted. 3 concubines reportedly threw plates. But Zhao Shen said nothing. He didn't explain himself at court. He didn't make proclamations. Instead, he requested a simple decree, that the courtyard behind the calligraphy pavilion be marked as private, by royal seal. Only he and one guest would enter, and when the scribes asked who that guest was, he wrote one word, Lian. She spent her days in the garden now, not as a servant, not as a guest, but as herself. She watered the ferns, sat beside the koi pond, read poems from scrolls he left for her each dawn. Sometimes he'd join her at dusk. He'd ask what herb she was growing, or what the market used to smell like in spring, or if she remembered the sound of rain on temple tiles. They never spoke of the market. They never spoke of what had been done to her, because neither of them needed to. One afternoon, she stood by the window in her new robe, still brown, but whole, watching. Petals fall. He came to her quietly, holding a book. Do you still feel out of place? He asked. She nodded once. Every day, he reached out, not to hold her, but to lift a single strand of hair from her cheek. You won't always, he said, and for the first time, she believed it. The days became slower, and for the first time in years, that slowness did not mean hunger or waiting or despair. It meant peace. Lian Su woke with the light now, not the cold. The linen smelled of camellia and tea leaves. The room she slept in was small but warm, its walls painted with soft flowers and faint birds, the kind she used to imagine while staring at the cracks in her old ceiling. There were no servants standing over her, no bells, no commands, only stillness. She would step into the courtyard and find the prince already there, not in royal silk, but in quiet robes of deep gray or green, hands behind his back, eyes resting on the pond. He didn't speak first. He never did, but when she arrived, he always turned, and always said her name. They shared meals without formality. He never sat above her, never waited to be served. Sometimes he poured her tea without a word and gestured toward a bowl with a small smile. Other times she reached for the ginger before he could, and he simply nodded, amused. She learned small things, that he preferred rain to sun, that he often reread the same poem over and over, not because he forgot it, but because it felt different depending on the day, that his mother had once grown a single magnolia tree from seed, and he still watered its descendant, hidden at the far edge of the garden, every week. Lian Su didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. He gave her pieces of himself freely, not in speeches but in patterns. and she offered him her presents in return. One afternoon, he showed her a cabinet filled with scrolls. "They belonged to my grandfather," he said. "He wrote everything down. Dreams, recipes, even the weather." She smiled faintly. "Did he ever write about women from the market?" He paused. "No," he said, "but I will." She looked at him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking, and her heart beat harder than she expected. Sometimes she forgot what the world outside the walls was like. The market felt like a past life, as if the stones where she once knelt had crumbled and been swept away. But it returned in moments. The flinch when a door slammed, the breath held when someone spoke too loudly. He noticed. Of course he did. One evening, as lanterns were being lit along the courtyard walls, he found her sitting alone on the garden bench, arms wrapped around herself, face still. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply sat beside her. They said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "They'll never forget who I was." He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Perhaps not," he said, "but they will be forced to. Remember who you are now." The next day, a silken package arrived for her. No note, no explanation. Inside, a new robe, brown, like the one she always wore, but lined with pale gold at the cuffs and stitched at the collar with a single, falling leaf. She touched the fabric with reverence. It was not grand, it was hers. She wore it that evening. He said nothing when he saw her in it, but his gaze stayed a little longer than usual. Their hands never touched. Not yet. But they moved closer now. They stood side by side while feeding the fish, sat just near enough for their sleeves to brush when the wind blew. And when she poured his tea one morning, he gently covered her hand with his for a heartbeat. No more. And still, it felt like a vow. She had never known love like this. Not love declared, but love offered. Daily, softly, without claim. One night, while the moon rested low and orange over the wall, she asked him something she had never dared before. "Why me?" He turned to her, a plum blossom in his hand. He studied it for a moment, then let it fall gently into the pond. "When a bird is injured," he said, "it hides. The world assumes it has died. But sometimes, quietly, it heals." He looked at her then, and flies stronger than before. That night she didn't sleep much, not because she was afraid, but because something inside her had started to ache, not with pain, but with hope. The most dangerous and beautiful thing of all. The whispers returned before the announcement. She still walks like a seller. She doesn't bow to the ministers. She eats with him at his table. No one dared speak too loudly, but they no longer needed to. In a palace built on silence, judgment didn't require volume. Only glances, only distance. Lian Su felt it in the air, like humidity before rain. She had changed robes, but not skin, had entered new halls, but not new blood. And some people would never let her forget it. But Zhao Shen never blinked. He walked with her in the courtyard every evening, hand gently resting behind her back. He read to her aloud beneath the plum tree when her hands trembled from memories she never explained. He placed her name in writing, consort by heart, by deed, and by choice. And yet he hadn't proposed, not in words, not yet, until the night it rained. It was not a storm, only a soft, steady rain that soaked the garden paths in quiet reflections. She stood under the covered walkway, watching the drops fall on the lily pond, eyes lost in the water. Behind her, soft steps. Lian. She turned. He was not dressed in court robes, only a plain cloak of charcoal, damp at the shoulders. His hair loose, still drying. No crown, no guards, only him. She bowed her head slightly, but he stepped closer. "No," he said. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were tired, not with age, but with certainty. The kind that comes when a man decides at last not what is allowed, but what matters. "I was raised to lead with strength," he said, "but I've come to understand, peace takes more courage." She said nothing, only listened. "And," he continued, "you've given me peace, without ever asking for power, without ever seeking anything but dignity." He took a breath, then reached into his sleeve and drew out a thin band of silk. It wasn't gold. It wasn't jeweled. It was brown, like the robe she wore the day they met, embroidered at the edge with falling leaves and a single line of calligraphy she couldn't read. He lifted her hand, slowly, wrapped the silk around her wrist. and tied it. "Let this be enough," he said. "No parade, no drums, no empty chairs filled with judgment." Her lips parted. "You mean?" He nodded once. "I want you to stay, not as a guest, not as a consort." He stepped closer, voice low. "But as my wife." There was no formal decree, no 7-day feast, only a garden lit by floating lanterns the next morning, and 2 bowls of tea resting on a stone table. Only the plum tree in bloom, only the man and woman who sat beneath it, shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, but understanding everything that had ever needed to be said. The court grumbled. The ministers wrote letters. The Empress Dowager refused to visit. But Zhao Shen did not waver, and the people listened. Because when a man of power makes no speeches but stands beside a woman who had once been crushed by that very world and stays, people begin to question what dignity truly means. They called it the wedding without drums. No horns, no parade, just stillness. And a robe hung beside his in the royal chambers, brown with a collar of soft gold, and her name carved into the record books in the prince's own hand. She never asked for more, but he gave it anyway. A new room in the palace gardens built with her input, a library window facing the sunset, just as she liked. A promise that no matter what the court thought, his hand would not let go. Years later, people would speak of the second prince's strange choice, of how he married a market widow and wore plain robes on festival days. But the servants said this. They often saw them walking side by side at dusk. They spoke little, but always walked in rhythm. And in a world of noise and names, that was a kind of love many rulers never found. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when Lian Su lay beneath warm silk and the wind brushed the garden shutters, she would reach for the silk band still tied around her wrist and smile, because she had once been no one, invisible, unwanted. And now, she was simply his. No crown, no titles, only a name spoken in reverence by the only voice that had ever mattered. Zhao Shen, her husband, her flame, her home, the end.
Before you go, if this story made your heart feel something, even just for a moment, don't leave without hitting subscribe. It means the world to us, and it helps us bring you more stories, quiet, emotional, and unforgettable. Leave a comment, and we'll reply using your name. As a personal thank you for being part of this journey. You matter here, truly.